sometimes I wonder, I hope that he wasn't scared, that it all happened pretty quickly for him.
Once you get married, all of a sudden it turns out to be a different person in some respects. I can't do that. It's not possible.
A 78-year-old woman sitting quietly in her Colorado home just confirmed what millions suspected for decades about one of America's most beloved singers. What she said was not dramatic at all. She did not shout it or post it anywhere. She simply told the truth, and in doing so, she cracked open a story the world thought it already knew. Trust me, this is not the story you have heard. The girl who carried the signs. Her name is Annie Martell Denver, and if you have never heard that name before, that is exactly the point. She is the reason one of the most played love songs in American history exists. She is the woman John Denver wrote Annie's song about, the woman he first spotted carrying cardboard signs across a college stage, the woman he married 9 months after meeting her, and the woman who quietly rebuilt her life after one of the most watched divorces of the 1970s. For decades, rumors circulated about what Annie truly felt about that song, about whether she still felt anything when she heard it, about whether the love John Denver sang about so beautifully was actually real, or just a performance so well crafted that even he started to believe it. In 2022, on the Mobituaries podcast with Mo Rocca, Annie finally answered all of it. She said something so simple and so devastating that it stopped people mid-sentence when they heard it. She said, "I still cry when I hear it." That was all. Just a woman in her late 70s telling the truth in a quiet voice. And the truth turned out to be exactly what people hoped for, and somehow far more complicated than anyone imagined. Because the full story of Annie Martell and John Denver is not a love story. It is not a tragedy either. It is something harder to name than both of those things. It is the story of a man who could fill a stadium with joy and yet had no idea how to stay in the same room as the woman he loved most. And it is the story of a woman who only discovered who she really was after losing him completely. To understand why any of this happened, you have to understand where Annie was when John Denver first found her. It was the spring of 1966 in a small college town in Minnesota called St. Peter. Annie Martell was 19 years old, a sophomore at Gustavus Adolphus College studying art education. She had grown up in that same town, the eldest of 4 children in a family that owned a beloved local dinner club called the Holiday House, which sat on the banks of the Minnesota River. Her father, Eldon, managed that restaurant for 38 years. Her town had known her family for generations. She was a yearbook editor. She was grounded, modest, and completely unprepared for what was about to walk into her life. That spring, a folk trio called the Chad Mitchell Trio came to perform at the college. One of the musicians was a 22-year-old named Henry John Deutschendorf Jr., a name that no marquee in the world had room for, which is why most people would eventually know him as John Denver. After the concert, he wandered into the student union where a charity event was underway. Students were performing a small musical together. Annie was the girl carrying cardboard signs across the stage, one that read Act 1 and one that read Act 2. Denver saw her and could not look away. He later told people she was wearing blue jeans, a flannel shirt, and penny loafers, and that he remembered every detail of that outfit for the rest of his life. Some men forget what their wives wore on their wedding day. John Denver never forgot what Annie wore the first night he saw her carrying prop signs across a charity stage. They began exchanging letters. John toured and Annie studied, and the courtship unfolded across hundreds of miles of telephone lines and handwritten envelopes. After about 9 months, he proposed. She said no, but then she changed her mind and had her best friend call John to tell him to ask again. This is one of the details about Annie Martell that people overlook completely. She was not swept away. She was deliberate. She thought it through. changed her mind after careful consideration, and then orchestrated her own yes through someone else. That is who she was. On June 9, 1967, they married at First Lutheran Church in St. Peter. She was 20. He was 23. The reception was held at the Holiday House, her family's own restaurant. Her little sister, Terry, was the flower girl. A photograph from that day shows the two of them crossing a small bridge on the restaurant grounds, laughing. He was not famous. She was not his muse yet. He was just a young man with a guitar and a habit of writing letters, and she was just the girl who decided she loved him enough to say yes. That simplicity would not last very long. Within a few years, John Denver became something none of them were fully ready for. Take Me Home, Country Roads in 1971 made him a phenomenon almost overnight. Then came Rocky Mountain High, Sunshine on My Shoulders, and in 1974, the song that would define everything and quietly complicate the rest of Annie's life at the same time. The truth she finally told. Here is what almost every telling of this story gets wrong about Annie's song. People assume it came from a romantic evening. They imagine John gazing at Annie across a candlelit dinner, so overwhelmed by love that the words simply arrived. That is not even close to what actually happened. By 1974, the marriage was already fracturing. Denver was on the road constantly. Annie was at home in Aspen raising 2 adopted children, hosting dinner parties that John never attended because he was always somewhere else, and living through an identity crisis she could not quite put into words. She told People magazine years later that as his fame grew, she stopped knowing who she was. She felt she had no identity outside of being Mrs. John Denver. That is a devastating thing to admit out loud, and she said it plainly. In late 1973, the pressure finally cracked everything open. Denver left alone for Switzerland. Annie told interviewers later that the separation lasted only 6 days, but felt like 3 months. She would wake at 4 in the morning and cry until she fell asleep again at night. Eventually, she called him. She told him she loved him unconditionally. They came back to each other. Shortly after he returned, Denver went skiing alone on Ajax Mountain in Aspen. He finished a run, got on the chairlift, and in the 10 minutes it took to ride to the top, something shifted inside him that he never fully explained and never needed to. He became acutely aware of everything around him, the color of the mountain sky, the sound of skiers swooshing beneath the lift, the mechanical hum of the cable above him, birdsong. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, he thought of Annie. He rode to the top, skied down, drove home, went to his office, and wrote the entire song in less than 10 minutes. Annie confirmed this herself in a 2022 interview with Mo Rocca. She said, "Initially, it was a love song, and it was given to me through him, and yet for him, it became a bit like a prayer." Annie's song hit #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 for 2 weeks in the summer of 1974. It hit #1 in the United Kingdom. It sold more than 1 million copies. It has been used at weddings on every continent for 50 years. And Annie Martell Denver, the woman who inspired every single word of it, never received a single cent in royalties. She confirmed this herself, not with bitterness, but simply as a statement of fact. That one detail, delivered quietly without drama, tells you everything about the architecture of their marriage. Now, to understand why a man capable of writing something that beautiful could also be so completely lost inside his own life, you need to go all the way back to where John Denver came from. Henry Joe Deutschendorf Jr. becomes John Denver. He was born Henry John Deutschendorf Jr. on December 31, 1943 in Roswell, New Mexico, the son of one of the most decorated pilots in Air Force history. His father, Captain Henry Dutch Deutschendorf, flew a B-58 Hustler bomber on January 12, 1961, at an average speed of 1,061 miles per hour, setting 6 world speed records in a single day. He was the kind of man who broke records professionally and then came home and could not figure out how to tell his children he loved them. Denver described his childhood as the life of a deeply awkward, deeply insecure loner. The family moved constantly, following his father from base to base. Every time John started to feel settled somewhere, they packed up and relocated. When he was 11 years old, his grandmother gave him a 1910 Gibson acoustic guitar. From that moment forward, music was the one home he could carry with him everywhere. He enrolled at Texas Tech to study architecture because that was what a responsible person was supposed to do. He lasted 2 years before packing his belongings into a white 1956 Chevrolet and driving to Los Angeles to play folk music for anyone who would listen. In Los Angeles, he performed at a folk club called Ledbetter's, owned by Randy Sparks, who founded the New Christy Minstrels. Sparks told Denver that Deutschendorf would never fit on a sign. Denver resisted. He was attached to his family name in a way that made perfect sense for a boy who had never felt he belonged anywhere. But eventually he gave in, and the name Denver came from a song title that happened to be sitting on Sparks's desk that day. His brother Ron later confirmed publicly that their father was never actually angry about the name change. In 1965, Denver was selected from 250 applicants to replace Chad Mitchell as lead singer of the Chad Mitchell Trio. And during his time with that group, he locked himself in a room one evening with a pound of salami and a 6-pack of beer and wrote a song he first called Babe, I Hate to Go. His producer, Milt Oken, renamed it Leaving on a Jet Plane. Peter, Paul, and Mary recorded it in 1967, and it became the last #1 single of the entire 1960s. When Annie first saw him in 1966, he was still completely unknown. By the time they divorced in 1982, he had sold more than 33 million records in the United States alone. He had hosted the Grammy Awards 5 times. His Rocky Mountain Christmas television special drew 60 million viewers, the highest-rated show in ABC history at the time. He was named Colorado's Poet Laureate. He received a NASA Public Service Medal. He testified before the United States Senate and compared proposed music censorship to Nazi book burnings, a moment that stunned the very politicians who thought he would be on their side. And through all of it, he came home less and less. The marriage, the family, and the fracture. Annie once told journalists that she had become a socialite in Aspen while John was on the road, hosting dinner parties that John never attended because he simply was not there. Denver actually wrote about this in his autobiography in a sentence that says more than he probably intended. He wrote that Annie had turned into quite a socialite, hosting many famous dinner parties to which he was never invited, being on the road as he was. He framed his own absence as if it were her social success rather than his failure to show up. That is a man who had learned to narrate his own life in a way that protected him from the parts he could not face. The divorce in 1982 produced one of the strangest moments in the history of celebrity splits. During the division of their assets, Denver arrived at Annie's door holding a running chainsaw. She thought for a moment he had come to kill her. He had not. He had come because Annie had cut down a row of trees near their Aspen property without asking him, trees he loved, and he was beyond furious. He had already grabbed her throat in the kitchen before stopping himself. He then took the chainsaw to the kitchen table, the dining room table, and the headboard of their shared bed. When someone asked him about this incident years later at a book event, he said without hesitation, "Yes, it happened, and it is not a part of my life I am proud of." Almost nobody knows that story. It is the part of the John Denver story that gets quietly left out of every tribute. Secrets and struggles behind the giant. After the divorce, he remarried in 1988 to an Australian actress named Cassandra Delaney. She later called him an incredible bully in public interviews. She described his behavior as unforgivable. They had a daughter together named Jessie Bell, which shocked everyone who knew Denver had been told he was essentially sterile during his first marriage. But the second marriage lasted only until 1991. In his 1994 autobiography, Denver admitted to depression, LSD, heavy drinking, and dozens of infidelities throughout his first marriage. He wrote about standing on a 10th-floor hotel balcony in London and contemplating whether to step off it. He wrote about feeling like a fraud. The public version of John Denver, the sunshine troubadour in wire-rimmed glasses who sang about mountains and rivers, was a carefully maintained construct. The private version was a military loner's son who never stopped feeling like the new kid at school. One of the cruelest moments of his later career came in 1985 when the producers of We Are the World told him he could not participate because his image might undermine the song's credibility as a pop and rock anthem. John Denver, the man who had spent a decade fighting world hunger at the highest levels of government, was told he was not cool enough to sing about feeding hungry children. He wrote in his autobiography, "It broke my heart not to be included." You can hear in that sentence a man who had built an entire career on the idea that sincerity was enough, discovering in one phone call that the world had already moved past him. On October 12, 1997, John Denver departed Monterey Peninsula Airport at 5:12 in the afternoon in an experimental aircraft he had owned for exactly 15 days. The plane was a Rutan Long EZ, a home-built Canard-type aircraft, and it had a critical design flaw, introduced by its builder, that Denver and his mechanic had specifically discussed that same morning. The original design placed the fuel selector valve between the pilot's knees. The builder had moved it to the bulkhead behind the pilot's left shoulder. To switch fuel tanks, a pilot had to release his shoulder harness, remove his hand from the control stick, rotate his upper body 90 degrees to the left, reach behind his own shoulder, and find a valve handle that was not properly labeled, just a pair of pliers clamped to the stem because the original handle was inadequate. Plans had already been made to have the valve moved while Denver was on tour. He never came back from that tour. Witnesses near Lovers Point in Pacific Grove watched the plane fly level at about 400 feet. They heard the engine sputter. They watched the aircraft roll to the right, nose down, and disappear into the Pacific Ocean 150 yards from shore. His last communication with air traffic control was, "Do you have it now?" He was asking whether they could see his transponder on their screen. They confirmed they could. He never spoke again. The National Transportation Safety Board concluded that Denver had most likely reached behind his left shoulder to switch fuel tanks, and that the body rotation required to do so caused him to press the right rudder pedal without realizing it. On a Canard aircraft at low altitude with reduced engine power, that pressure is enough to begin a spiral the pilot cannot recover from. The fuel valve was found in the wreckage, seized halfway between two tank positions, as if someone had been trying to move it and stopped. He was 53 years old. His toxicology came back clean on every substance. He was completely sober. Annie Martell Denver, who had stayed in Aspen after their divorce, was named administrator of his estate. She divided his assets among all three of his children, including Jessie Bell, the daughter from a marriage Annie had nothing to do with. The process took 6 years to settle with the IRS. She designed the John Denver Sanctuary, a 4.5-acre park in Aspen, where the lyrics of his songs are carved into native river boulders. At the dedication of the park's expansion in 2012, she stood in the place she had built and said, "I know John could never have imagined something like this, honoring his memory." Jessie Bell Denver was married in September 2019 at the John Denver Sanctuary. The park that Annie designed, on land in the city where she had once hosted dinner parties John never attended, became the place where John's youngest daughter stood to say her wedding vows. Now we want to hear from you. Drop in the comments which part of this story hit you hardest, because this is the kind of story that lands differently for everyone.